The following was written by William Wildblood to serve as an introduction to his new book, Earth is a School. Faced with a statement like that in the title, the obvious thing to ask is, what is the school for? And the short answer is that it is a school for making gods. When you look around at your friends and neighbors, that might seem ridiculous. Indeed, when you look at yourself, it might seem positively absurd. Nonetheless, it is true. No doubt most of us are not anywhere near the end of the process, but the fact remains that this material environment is the ideal scenario for making self-centered beings into higher forms of life, able to engage with the universe with love and creative energy on its many planes of being. That's what a god is, though we give the word a small g to make clear that these gods operate within the perimeters of divine creation as laid down by God the Creator. To seek to operate outside these perimeters is what makes a devil, basically a being that rejects its maker and the deepest pattern of its own soul. We started a long time ago as little different from the animals, fully embedded in nature with no intellectual capacity to speak of, and no real sense of an individual self. The forces of evolution worked on us over vast periods of time. The challenges and experiences of the earthly situation molded us and drove us in a certain direction. Different groups of human beings experienced different challenges, but the general direction was similar: to bring out intelligence, creativity, and the sense of self. Early man had none of this. He reacted instinctively with unself-conscious awareness, and he was largely one with his environment. But the story of civilization is the story of becoming more conscious. That is to say, of consciousness contracting and becoming centered on itself, so in one way shrinking, but in another way becoming clearer and sharper. Losing the earthly spiritual contact with life, using the word spiritual in the loosest of senses, and becoming more focused on the physical world. Of course, an animal is completely focused in its physical being, and early humans were the same, but they retained a connection to the world's soul, which is a unified field of consciousness encircling the planet, and can be regarded as the inner side of nature. It is, as it were, the outer garment of spirit, where the forces of spirit begin to touch matter. It is not spirit itself. When the mind is more directed towards the physical world, it starts to separate itself from other minds. This leads to the development of individual intelligence. You become a real self, and you need a real mind in order to function as a self. We are well into that stage, but that is esoterically regarded as a nadir of an arc that stretches above the heavens to below the earth, and from the esoteric point of view, esoteric here meaning unacknowledged by everyday thought, the process has stalled. Instead of moving on from this stage, back up towards the spirit, we are digging ourselves deeper into it. We are solidifying ourselves in matter. This material entrenchment has been encouraged by anti-spiritual forces, the recognition of which is probably the most important thing we could do right now to get back on track. For if we fail to see these forces, that they exist, and what they seek to do, which is trap our consciousness eternally in matter, we face spiritual disaster. This is something that has been done on an individual level, as everything must be at this stage in the evolutionary journey. The school applies to each and every soul, and though not all have the same lessons at the same time, all need to recognize the reality of spirit to avoid flunking the course. 5 years ago, I wrote a post which has a bearing on this subject, and I would like to quote it from here. The evolution of consciousness is the process that transforms an atom into a Christ. That is to say, the evolutionary process turns a newly formed spiritual being into a fully functioning Son of God. The journey is one from innocence to experience, and then back to innocence again, but this time as a fully self-conscious state with all the fruits of experience, will, intellect, creativity, and so on added. The early Adamic state is when the newly created individual is not yet conscious of his individuality. He is one with nature and his environment. He is one with spirit as it is manifested in nature, but totally ignorant of his creator, the transcendent God. So he has to leave the paradise of union with the mother principle in order to know the Father. This means he has to experience the sense of separation and becoming conscious of duality, and that introduces the possibility of pain and suffering. So he has to discover himself as a person and a true individual, alone but also free. Early man lived in what we now call a participation consciousness. It was a state of unity, but natural, not spiritual, meaning that the union was an unconscious one with the anima mundi, not a fully conscious union of love with the Creator. Adam fell in order to know himself. Now, whether this fall was intended or not is an interesting point. Tradition affirms that it was not intended, not in the way that it happened anyway. Adam was meant to evolve in a more harmonious fashion, one in which death and suffering would not have played so great a part. However, the process was disrupted in a way mythologically presented in the book of Genesis, and sin entered into the equation. God had to remake his plans for the evolutionary path, but he has to do this constantly in response to the exercising of human free will anyway. He may have a plan, but is not fixed. It is an organic thing, always growing and changing according to how human beings react to it and what they instigate. There is a destiny and there is free will, and the two necessarily interact at every moment as life unfolds. This is true both on a collective and an individual level. Consequently, God's plan alters second by second according to events, but its direction remains constant. Each lifetime represents an opportunity for the incarnate soul to learn through experience, expression, and experiment. Learning can be intellectual, moral, creative, and so on, all of which are good. But the most important area of learning is spiritual, and the most important aspect of spiritual growth is acknowledgement of God. Today, there are many people who seek spiritual growth without reference to God, but this reflects the crime of our first parents. The school exists to teach you to become a God, but you can only do so when you understand that being a God means allowing God to work through you. The Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. Here is the whole teaching of the school.